All right, so today we're going to get into something pretty fascinating. We're talking about Nestle, the biggest food company on the planet, and how they tried to pull off this giant pivot. And look, this wasn't just some new ad campaign. We're talking a complete overhaul of their core strategy, and it all came about because they were in some serious trouble.
And that really is the heart of the matter, isn't it? What do you do when you're on top of the world, but the world suddenly decides it doesn't like you anymore? By the late 90s, the whole processed food industry wasn't just dealing with a few rivals, it was staring down a full-on identity crisis. So, to really get why Nestle did what they did, you have to understand the pressure cooker they were in. I mean, the ground was literally shifting under their feet. And this is where it gets crazy because the hits were coming from everywhere. You had the global obesity crisis, and companies like Nestle were getting blamed. You had their own customers ditching them for fresh, organic stuff. Then, on top of all that, their supply chain was under threat from climate change, water shortages, not to mention scandals over child labor and deforestation. It was, no exaggeration, a perfect storm. And this number, wow, 2 billion. Just let that sink in. 2 billion adults overweight or obese. We're not talking about a small market segment here. This is a global epidemic. And fairly or not, the finger was pointing straight at big food companies like Nestle. The pressure to do something was absolutely immense. So, faced with all this, what did Nestle's leadership do? Well, they didn't just tinker around the edges. They didn't just launch a new low-fat cookie. They came out and proposed a completely new philosophy for what it even means to be a good business. And this quote from their CEO at the time, Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, it's just perfect. He says, "I have heard all this talk that we have to give back to society, but I don't agree because we have not been stealing anything from society." It's kind of shocking, right? He basically threw out the whole idea of corporate charity. For him, the answer wasn't writing a check. It was about rebuilding the machine from the inside out. And this was his big idea, creating shared value, or CSV. Now, the key thing to get here is that this is not your grandma's corporate social responsibility. It's not about what a company does with its profits after the fact. It's about how a company makes its profits in the first place. The whole concept is that you can actually find massive business opportunities by solving the world's problems. They even had this pyramid to explain it. At the bottom, you've got the basics, compliance, just following the rules. The next step up is sustainability, which is about not messing up the future. But the top of the pyramid, the end goal, was CSV, where doing good for society and making a profit aren't two different things. They're the same thing. Okay, so that's the big, fancy theory. But what did it actually look like in practice? How did they turn this idea into a real-world business plan? Let's dig into the playbook. They boiled it all down to 3 core pillars: nutrition, water, and rural development. And listen, these weren't just some fluffy side projects in the annual report. These were the 3 areas they identified where what's good for society and what's good for Nestle's bottom line were perfectly aligned. All right, pillar number 1, nutrition. This was the obvious one, right? A direct shot at the obesity crisis. Nestle basically announced, okay, we're not just a food and drink company anymore, we are a nutrition, health, and wellness company. And that meant going back and changing the recipe for literally thousands of their products to cut down on salt, sugar, and fat. And this was way more than just talk. They actually reorganized the entire company. They created brand new divisions like Nestle Health Science, which was designed to make products that are kind of a cross between food and medicine. This was a huge, tangible sign that they were all in on this new direction. Okay, pillar 2, water. Now, this was a super sensitive topic for Nestle. They were getting hammered over their bottled water business. So using the CSV lens, they flipped the script. They looked at their own factories. Nearly 40% of them were in places with water shortages, and realized that cutting their water use wasn't just good PR. It was a matter of survival for their business. And some of the results were pretty amazing. Take this one dairy factory in Mexico. They developed a process to capture the water that evaporates from milk and then reuse it. Get this, it saved 1.6 million liters of water every single day. That is a textbook example of shared value. It saves Nestle a ton of money and risk, and it protects a critical resource for the local community. And the third pillar was rural development. This one gets to the very beginning of their supply chain. I mean, think about it. Nestle's whole business depends on millions of small farmers growing coffee, cocoa, you name it. And if those farmers are stuck in poverty, using old methods, their farms aren't productive, well, sooner or later, Nestle's supply of raw materials would just dry up. So what did they do? They invested. Big time. Just look at that number. They trained almost 400,000 farmers in 5 years on better ways to farm. The logic was simple. Help the farmers make more money and be more productive. That means a better, more reliable supply for Nestle. And it helps tackle the root causes of huge problems like child labor. It's supposed to be a win-win. So, this all sounds pretty revolutionary, but how did it compare to what their rivals were doing? Because let's be real, Nestle wasn't the only one feeling the heat.
And this chart does a great job of showing the different playbooks. You had Danone, who just went all in on health and sold off their other brands. PepsiCo kind of tried to have it both ways, making good-for-you stuff while also slashing costs. And then you have Coca-Cola, who basically went on the attack, fighting soda taxes. What made Nestle's approach so different was that they tried to weave these societal problems right into the fabric of their business strategy, instead of treating them like a PR problem or something to fight against.
So that's the strategy. Which brings us to the million-dollar question, or I guess in this case, the multi-billion-dollar question, did it actually work? And the answer, well, it's not so simple. If you look at it just from a money perspective, the answer seems to be yes. I mean, check out their stock performance. For 20 years, Nestle was consistently outpacing big names like Coca-Cola and Unilever. So for the folks who own the stock, the strategy looked like a home run. But, and this is a huge but, here is the flip side. For all that talk and all that investment, the bad headlines just didn't stop. They were still getting slammed for their water bottling. They were getting sued over child labor in their cocoa supply chain. That old infant formula scandal from the 70s just wouldn't die. And then there was forced labor found in their seafood supply chain in Thailand. So yeah, CSV was definitely not some magic wand that could wave away all their problems. And you can imagine how frustrating this was inside the company. This quote from their own head of investor relations just nails it. He's basically saying, hey, we think we've discovered this incredibly powerful new way to do business that gives us a huge advantage, but nobody on the outside gets it. To the rest of the world, investors, activists, you name it. They were still just the same old Nestle, tangled up in the same old controversies. And that brings us right back to the beginning, to the big fundamental question. Is creating shared value a real deal blueprint for the future of capitalism? A way for companies to profit by actually making the world better? Or is it just the smartest, most sophisticated PR campaign we've ever seen? That's the question Nestle's whole experiment leaves us with.